Boom. And we're live. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Men with Purpose. We're having conscious conversations around masculinity with other men's facilitators with the idea to bring a little bit more attention to this field of men's work and what it's really like to be a conscious man today. What is masculinity? What does a real man look like? And today I'm joined by a very special guest. His name is Soma Miller. He's the founder of The Essential Man. So Soma is a breath worker, a yogi, a men's coach. He's deeply involved into the field of men's work. He's been leading men's circles and events for many years now. He's really helping men who are looking for support, but they're not too sure where to actually start. And with that, I'm really pleased for you, Soma, to be here. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be here. Excellent. Yeah.
Likewise. I normally ask guests to just take a deep breath and to do a check-in, whatever is present for them, whatever they feel. They feel the in the present moment. So maybe let's do that.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So what I'm noticing, I feel a little nervous, simultaneously excited, open, and yeah, I'm feeling a lot of kind of movement. Like I feel this movement of energy coming up the front of my body.
I'm feeling alive right now. I'm feeling incredibly grateful for the opportunity to sit down together and really dive in a little bit deeper into this work. And also, it's been a very long week, so I'm also grateful for that I'm able to kind of finish off on a high note, have a great conversation here, and afterwards take a little bit of time off to give myself some self-care and some self-love over the weekend.
Yeah, good for you, man. That's so important. Yeah.
Yes, it is indeed. Right. So I've kind of briefly outlined a little bit what you've been involved with. Perhaps can we start a little bit from the beginning? How did you kind of get on this path of conscious learning, got involved into men's work, et cetera, et cetera? Because I think it's important to see how different men kind of got on this path in the first place.
Yeah, I'd be happy to share. Yeah, it's been a long and winding road, as the Beatles say. And yeah, probably, I think the path of consciousness per se started at a pretty young age for me. I would say my teens, as a teenager, at least to whatever degree consciousness was at that point. And I, had some experiences around that time where, I really discovered something that was really important to me, which was playing music. That really opened me up to my creativity. And yeah, there was something in that discovery that at least felt like some alignment with purpose at that time. And also during that time, of self-discovery, I got into some substances, started experimenting with some psychedelics as a teenager. And that, that totally blew my mind open, in terms of what was actually happening on different layers of the human experience, my own experience, right? And around that time also, I've had some teachers that felt like they could see the depth in me, and they were turned on in a certain way and recommended some books to me at the time that sort of kept opening me in a way. Like I think one teacher gave me, I think it was The Alchemist or something like that. And
wow.
Somehow I came across the book Be Here Now when I was in high school. And so all that stuff, they were just like planting these little seeds for me. And then, it was also a difficult time, it's finding my identity, trying to like figure out where I belonged, which I never really felt like I did
Mm.
very well. Um, and after high school, I went through a bit of a period of depression. Um, and, I think it was rooted in like, what am I doing with my life? Like, what am I here to do? And this, like, I don't want to just, like, I was really clear at a young age, like, I don't want to just get a job, make money, and just like
Mm.
get by. Like it was clear to me that I wanted to do something that felt aligned for me.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, so there was the pain of that. I think other layers of pain as well. But then I found myself moving from New York. Like I packed all my belongings in the back of my car. I was just like, I'm out, like I gotta go like
See ya.
find myself. Yeah. So I drove across the country
Wow.
and didn't know where I was headed. I mean, I kind of knew I was going to be in California, but I didn't know where I was going to land. And yeah, over a period of time, I ended up in San Francisco in the Bay Area. And that was really eye-opening being there because I tapped into, very progressive culture from what I was used to growing up on the
Mm.
East Coast. So I was turned on to all kinds of stuff at the time. Um, you know, I started experimenting with my diet and eating healthier and getting acupuncture, fasting,
Wow.
cleansing, detoxifying, doing yoga, and yeah, that I was on to something. I didn't really know what, but
Mm.
I think I recognized that the way we were living as a culture just felt way out of alignment, at least for
Mm.
me. And to me, it was reflected in just the conflict that we see in the world, the way that we're
Mm.
destroying our environment. Um, you know, just I think that this general tone of like selfishness, I would say. And I think I realized probably around 21 that I want to live in community. I want to live in an
Mm.
environment where people are collectively supporting one another. There's an intention towards, kind of awareness, elevation, consciousness, connection.
Mm.
And yeah, so I just kind of really dove in at that time, like reading all kinds of books, studying whatever I could find. I soon after that, about a couple years later, I found myself in Hawaii, really trying to live a lifestyle that was connected to the earth. I studied something called permaculture design, which was all about like sustainable living
Mm.
and living responsibly in relationship to the elements. Um, and yeah, simultaneously, I was just like doing my life and finding, I think the biggest challenge and sort of pain point that I was confronted with initially was it came up around relationship, and
Mm.
I got into a relationship with somebody and kind of had my heart broken in a way, sort of the first person I allowed myself to open to,
Mm.
and there was something in me that just was for her not quite there,
Mm. Mm.
and I didn't know what it was, thought I was great on some level. Um, but what I didn't realize is that I had a lot of these kind of unconscious blind spots that
Mm.
I was living with, um, and that was really hard to recognize. And I actually found myself in this relationship for a couple of years really unhappily, but I kind of stayed in it because it felt like some semblance of love.
Mm.
And eventually after a couple of years, I was just mustering the courage to leave. And
Wow.
um, um, simultaneously, I kept kind of learning and working on myself in different ways. And I serendipitously came across this event where somebody was talking about, rite of passage that they had just gone through,
Mm.
um, with the Mankind Project. And I mean, sir, that serendipitously, because I was also reading a book simultaneously about this African shaman that had kind of gone, through a traditional rite of passage in his community in Africa, and you know, but also was raised in sort of a westernized mindset, so he was able to like take that experience and you know
Wow.
share about it in a way from like a western minded perspective, which is
Hmm.
quite different. But that I was just super fascinated by that, and I was like, wow, I'd love to have that experience and like figure out what it means to be a man,
Mm.
and so soon after that, I just set a really powerful intention to call that into my life. I didn't know how, um, but I just did that. And I was traveling at the time, and I found myself in Southern California, and I came across an event that there was a group of men that had just gone through something like that, and I went and connected with them. And I was traveling with this woman I was with at the time,
Mm.
and
And this is in the same relationship?
yeah, I was still in the same relationship, and we were traveling together,
Wow.
and I connected with this group of men, and I think that was what gave me the strength to kind of let go and
Mm.
move on and say, I need to start over here.
Mm.
And so I ended up staying in that small town in Southern California, called Ojai, and embarking on this year-long initiation with this group of men and a teacher by the name of Francis Weller.
Mm.
And yeah, so that's kind of my first experience with men's work,
Wow.
and so, and it's been a long journey since then. I was probably about 23, 24 at that point.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah,
You strike me, since even you were, since you were a young man, rather, 21, traveling across the country by yourself, searching for maybe a deeper meaning, a purpose, if you will. You've been through so long. I mean, that in and of itself could be maybe seen as a rites of passage in and of itself, right?
that's true. Yeah, yeah,
Interesting. You said
yeah,
you stayed for 1 year in that city. Was this like a 1 year, sorry, a year-long process that you were going?
yeah,
Wow. Okay.
yeah. It was
What
a
was that
year-long
like?
process. Yeah, so I won't go into too many details just to kind of honor the
Of course, of
confidentiality
course,
of
of
the
course.
experience, but um, yeah, it was, interestingly, here's the other coincidence, that book that I was reading by that African healer shaman, his name was Malidoma Some. He was actually ended up being one of the mentors to the
What?
man that led
Wow.
us through the initiation. Yeah.
What are the chances? Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So some of the rites of passage processes, they were rituals
Mm.
given over a series of weekend retreats, and some of them were kind of rooted in traditional African ceremony in a
Mm.
way. So they were very like connected to the earth, and yeah, they were there to kind of help us face certain shadows within
Mm.
us, um, help us connect to each other as a tribe, as a collective, to support one another.
Mm.
Because I think one of the things my original mentor used to say, like one of the greatest wounds of like the kind of modern American man mindset is that wound of belonging,
Mm.
that need to belong, right? Um, and that's something I've definitely seen over the years, how we're highly conditioned, at least men in America, to really isolate ourselves, especially if we're in emotional pain of any
Mm.
kind.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
I can relate to this. Like even me living in in London and then going to Thailand rather. It's a common notion that most men, whatever, regardless whatever they're going through, let's say something traumatic or something difficult for them, maybe a breakup with a woman, they tend to kind of put up the mask on, the shield is up, and it's very difficult to
yeah,
kind of look for chinks in the armor, so to speak. There's a couple of cracks to really kind of dive into that. um, One thing I wanted to preface is because this actually came up in other podcasts as well. For people that are listening or tuning in right now, there is a certain value of mystery around these type of events. It's not for the sake of actually, oh, tell me everything that actually happened. There is a certain value into stepping into the unknown and not actually knowing what's going to happen. It is out of respect also to the facilitator, but also not to kind of take away this moment, which equivalent of that is his life, right? You step into maybe into a new city, you don't know what's going to happen. Life sometimes presents itself with you know some curveballs, probably the best metaphor to use. So with these type of events, regardless of where you go, there is going to be a mystery. Don't expect us to find a step-by-step manual of what's going to happen over the weekend or over the course of the 3 months or whatever program you're on. So I just wanted to
yeah,
preface that a little bit.
yeah. I think that's important, and it's a good point, because there's something, the value in being unprepared for something is that, when our minds get a hold of information, um, they start to kind of try to be in control of conditions,
Mm, mm,
and and in a way, that need to be in control can take away from an experience that can open us up outside of the familiarity of how we've
mm-hmm.
set ourselves up to live from. And
Yes.
there's a lot of freedom and opening that can happen in that
Mm-hmm,
space.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I think it's also the to kind of top this point up is the whole notion of this liminality, the
yeah,
liminal space. You're getting into something that you're not familiar with. You're like a little bit maybe a clash of identity of who am I, what am I doing here, what's going to happen. And I find that a lot of men come with preconceived notions. Obviously, everybody's coming up with their own shadows, projections, etc., etc. So it is important to be put in this kind of no man's land, if you will, and just let
hmm
the process unfold.
yeah, absolutely. And that's always been an element of initiation
Mm,
from way back when, is
yes.
that liminal space. It's like the space between identities, the space between worlds. And we need to be able to, we need to learn how to be there. It's actually a practice in being there as men,
Mm,
of kind of, it's a little bit of surrender, but it's not a surrender that you're like, I'm just like flailing. There's a presence to it, like
mm,
I'm willing to, face this threshold
yes.
into maybe a new way of being.
Mm, mm. Do you think I've tried to kind of delve in more into this whole notion of ritual, because at least from my perspective, I'm curious to hear you as well and what you think about this. We seem to have lost a lot of that rituals that have been happening, rites of passage, if you will. But can you talk a little bit about the value of having a ritual, especially in today's society?
Yeah. To me, ritual is a way, I mean, number one, it's something that's been practiced since the beginning of time. And why I love ritual is, um, it kind of links the the interior world with the exterior world in a way where, you know, we can access the subconscious mind, which is not always easy to tap into because we have this cognitive mind that's, you know, trying to be in control of things. So it actually helps put us into that more that liminal space, or um, that sacred space that, um, you know, I think the brain becomes more plasticized in a way, you know, that kind of neuroplasticity
Plasticity, yeah.
softens, and we can see parts of ourselves that we might not normally have access
Mm,
to.
mm,
um, and um, yeah, and ritual, you know, there's a broad definition of what that is,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and there is no defined ritual, you know, and it
Yes.
can be very very in the moment. There's certain rituals that have been done time and time again over the hundreds of years, right,
Mm-hmm,
through different
mm-hmm.
religions, and and to some degree, like the rituals that are practiced over and over again, I think they can lose some of their aliveness, some of the sacred quality, because they're so
Mm,
rehearsed, you know.
mm,
I think
mm.
anybody that's grown up in like a religious household, they've probably experienced like a lack of depth to certain prayers that are just kind of
Yeah, it's like very
stated.
predictable. Yes, you kind of
Yeah,
used to it, and the magic kind of fades away a little bit.
yeah, yeah. So I think, to me, a good ritual always, there may be some elements that are consistent, you know, but it always invites in that mystery, that unknown,
Mm,
some spontaneity.
mm-hmm. Understood. Understood. Yeah, I think we really, you know, we miss this a lot in our modern day society, at least from what I've seen. The thing is, though, I think most people are not even aware of something like this. But whenever they come together, especially for, you know, for I'm speaking from the point of men, because that's what I've witnessed, that's what I've experienced and saw and seen. It For the first 10-15 minutes, whenever you're in a group setting, in a men's circle, it feels a little bit weird, right? Like, oh, I'm speaking with some people I've never met before, complete strangers. How am I expect to open up? After a while, it becomes so natural, right? Maybe because of that ritual that we've been doing, it's kind of encoded in our DNA. We've been doing it for, like you said, since the beginning of time. So there is a part of us which is familiar, at least from what I've experienced. So,
Yeah,
uh,
no, I totally agree. And I mean, it's just like, yeah, you put a bunch of men in front of a fire, right? And something deepens just from that, right?
indeed, indeed. Um, so again, to come back to your story, so you're there, you're 1 year really going super deep with other men in kind of in a ritual space. You're going through, I would imagine, pretty interesting but also pretty challenging times as well. um,
Yeah.
and this is all led by a facilitator.
Yeah, it was facilitated by Francis Weller, and you know, he had a couple assistants supporting him. Another
Mm,
mentor of mine named by the name of Richard Palmer,
mm,
and yeah, so there was a number of men that had sort of previously been initiated and were helping to hold that container with him. And yeah, a lot of it was done out in nature. Some of it was focused on um, going into the wounds that we had kind of
mm,
suppressed,
mm,
and getting into contact with those, because, you know, and this is sort of like a archetypal theme, I think, that shows up in a lot of myths and art and
mm.
music. The relationship between our wounds and our greatest gifts, and
Wow.
you know, they're kind of intimately connected. And so we did some work around that, you know, like really drawing out um, the because basically the parts of us that get wounded, we actually end up cutting off certain aspects of who we
Mm-hmm,
are, right?
mm-hmm,
Because we
mm-hmm.
we deem them unacceptable or unlovable, so we kind of tuck them away into like a dark corner of our
Yeah.
psyche. And you know, but we need those, you know. So part of initiation is going in to retrieve what we have disowned, for,
Mm.
and, reclaiming that in a way
Mm.
so that we can be whole again.
Yes.
And when an inner wholeness is where our gifts flow from.
Mm. And for people who don't know what we're talking about, this is kind of referred to the shadow side of us, the part that we are most of the time really neglecting, and we're not really comfortable going back and looking into. This kind of came from, I think most of the work was actually from Carl Jung's work, like
Yeah,
where most of
yeah,
this come up. So I bet this was pretty intense stuff. Like this is especially for a
yeah,
year long. Wow. Okay.
yeah. Yeah, it was. And, the other really important piece that came out of it for me was um, getting back in touch with my emotional body, which I had sort of deemed not acceptable, not manly enough. And so I'd kind of cut myself off emotionally in a way. And um, finally had a moment where I was able to come back into relationship with myself, but I had to go into the pain, and I had to feel the grief of um, basically everything that I had turned off at a certain point had kind of locked up in my body.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah.
Wow. I maybe not so recently, but just to share something personal, maybe a couple of months ago, I was going through something similar. I was speaking with this gentleman. His name is Michael Gay, so he's kind of facilitating or helping
Yeah,
to,
I've heard of him. Yeah.
yeah, Sacred Sons. So we actually did something, a process, if you will, without getting into too much detail. And I was able to again step in or be in relationship with that part of me, and I just like broke in tears. I just started crying. I was just like, wow, it was such a strong emotional really. I knew actually I needed something like that. That's why I said to myself, okay, I need a little bit of coaching and an extra perspective from another man. um,
Yeah.
and we were speaking, and he says, this happens all the time. Like it's a pattern with, like you said, maybe archetypal, but and I've seen it even at men's circles. There was this gentleman, 57-year-old ex army vet. He said,
Hmm.
during this 2-hour meeting, I've said things to you that I've never said to anybody else. At the end, he started crying. I was like, wow, like there is so much
Yeah.
grief, I think, in men that is very little is little understood, not enough spoken to, and really not expressed at all, at least from what I've seen.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's part of our vitality, right? All that
Mm.
stuff that we try to shove down. And, you know, men have had to do it for a reason. Like, I think it's really important to just set the context that, you know, just because like you might be somewhat suppressed, emotionally suppressed as a man, no reason to shame yourself for that. In
Mm.
fact, I think men, especially in the sort of warrior culture, we had to toughen ourselves up a bit to cope with facing death,
Mm.
witnessing death, seeing our friends die on the battlefield. Uh, you know, most of us haven't necessarily lived this in this lifetime, but just the kind of architecture of the male body, um, for survival's sake,
Mm.
we've had to learn how to compartmentalize ourselves
Mhm.
emotionally.
Mhm.
And I don't know about cultures past. Maybe they went to battle and had a healthy way to then go and process all the
Mhm.
trauma, right,
Mhm.
that happened. Um, but we see this all the time in like modern soldiers, right, where they come back with PTSD, and there's no support for them.
Mm. It's a good point actually. I'm very glad you're bringing this up, because we do need to put a little bit of context around this. If people, somebody's listening right now and is going through something like this, and it can relate to this conversation, know that it's okay. Everybody's going through that. Everybody's on their own journey, working through their own, personal, experiences, wounds, etc., etc. So it's nothing to be necessarily ashamed about. Even though I know, speaking from personal experience, I felt a lot of shame around that. But yeah, it is a coping mechanism. I never thought about it this way, but yeah, throughout time, especially when men go on the battlefield, I would imagine there's very little time to spend on actually grieving or thinking about what's actually happening. You're expected to go there and perform, and hopefully come out alive out of it. So yeah, I'm
Yeah,
curious to know how they actually cope with that back in the days, because right now I don't think
yeah,
there's much support for something like this.
yeah. I'm curious too, and I could make some stuff up, but I don't really know.
Yeah.
But you brought up a word that I think is important to draw out, and this is sort of part of the male psyche, which is to perform, right?
Mm.
And I think men are deeply conditioned for performance. Like my value is based on what I can do, right?
Hmm.
Rather than based on who I am. And so that shows up sexually for a lot of men. That'll show up in, how we approach our work, even how we approach our relationships sometimes. And and that, you know, it's valuable to be able to perform. Like, all these things have their positive side, right? But the shadow side to always feeling like we need to perform is we can abandon ourselves in the process,
Hmm.
and um, you know, performance is often, I mean, if you think of like a theater performance, it's often done for an external audience, right?
Hmm.
um, so yeah, and I think I see a lot of men relating to themselves from this performance mentality. Like
Hmm.
we rate ourselves based on, how we're showing up, how much money we're making, if we gave her an orgasm, all these things,
Hmm.
and we can kind of get trapped in that box of only getting that sort of external validation
Mm.
based on
Yeah,
what we
it's an
do.
important thing. Yeah, definitely a great point. I spoke with Raffia Morgan, who's also 40 plus years involved in personal development, men's working. We kind of talked a little bit about that, the fact that the castrated men, metaphorically speaking, of course, and how they kind of become this kind of sort of a dickhead, meaning they use kind of their head to perform in other ways and kind of slam through walls and slam through challenges. And this is how
Yeah.
they kind of put their self-worth, as opposed, related to how they're performing in, various aspects of life, like you said. So, and something I can relate to personally as well. I think it's a common theme, like you said. I think also part of the conditioning, I would say.
Yeah, I think it's really, I mean, I find myself in that place all the time, and I have to back off, slow down, and really check in, like where am I operating from, you
Mm.
know? And I think that's such a huge piece of awareness that, men tuning into this, that I really encourage you to pay attention to, is like, we all have these habits of action, habits of doing, right? And we need to get a better sense of where, like, rather than going on autopilot in our
Mm.
lives and just acting from habit, which is, our patterns, our childhood conditioning, our societal conditioning. That way we can sort of become sovereign and really choose consciously every act. Every act is significant. Every
Mm-hmm.
choice is significant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is easier said than done, but sometimes
Yeah,
this
I
can
know, I
take a
know.
lifetime. Yeah.
It is a work of a lifetime, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to acknowledge that and commit to it. Otherwise we're just gonna
Yeah.
default to living as the status quo, living
Mm-hmm.
as what's expected of us.
Yeah. Oh, and sometimes these expectations is difficult when you don't fulfill them. It puts even more pressure. It just becomes a vicious cycle.
For sure.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Uh, talk to me a little bit about the value of mentors, because you mentioned this a couple of times, and it seems to be a theme for most of the guests that, and also for myself personally. Um, and sometimes people come and say, oh, how do I find a mentor? Like, can you talk a little bit about what the value for you has been by, having the opportunity to be around someone, a male figure, if you will?
Yeah. It's so priceless in a way to have an older man. They don't have to be older, but somebody that has more wisdom, more experience, that has gone to places that we have yet to go or touch or experience. And the gift, there's multiple gifts, and it's a reciprocal relationship in a traditional mentorship. I think there's different ways of getting mentoring. I mean, you can absolutely like pay a coach to kind of be a mentor, right? And I think there's probably even a reciprocity that happens there, that may not always be acknowledged. I think mentoring used to be a lot more of a traditional part of male culture, where we would, the classic example that I love of this is, I'm sure there's a lot of movies about this, but growing up, the Karate Kid, and Mr. Miyagi. I mean,
Yes.
that's such an archetypal mentor relationship there. And, there was something about that, even seeing that at a young age, that really touched me in a deep way. I think there's a longing that a lot of men have to be, not only to be seen for who they are, but to be led, and guided. And I certainly had that. And, I had to seek it out. I had to really intentionally look for men that I respected and admired, which was not easy to find. Because I was already a pretty deep person, and had some awareness, and I really wanted to find role models that were living a life of integrity that I could really look up to. And yeah, and there's something that happens in that kind of relationship that's not just about like the kind of education or knowledge that the way that we're taught in schools, most schools, right? Where, here's how to get from A to B. It's more like a transmission, and what I mean by that, it's kind of hard to, completely put to words, but there's something that happens by being around people that are at another level of consciousness, at another level of development, that, we become more like them. We kind of take on and start to embody those qualities in a way, organically.
Man, I can totally relate. Just listening to you, thinking about my experiences with my mentors, it's the same thing as going into a weekend with other men. Let's say a men's retreat. It's very difficult to describe with words what actually happens there. I could probably list a couple of things, but for the people that are not aware of this, they would just look, oh, these are maybe a couple of exercises. You did a little bit of breath work. That's it. But also, being around other male figures, at least for me, exactly like you said, I unconsciously begin to model their behaviors, kind of taking a little bit more and kind of filling my own void, if you will, right? Maybe because the father figure of my father wasn't there the way I was maybe expecting him, unconsciously to be, and being able to get some of that energy elsewhere, which is, from a mentor in this case. So yeah, I like what you said. It is priceless. It is priceless. If you're one of those boys right now, maybe a younger or teenager looking at this, again, it's one of those things. It's difficult
At
to describe.
any age, I just want to say any age. You can be mentored at any age.
Yeah, great. Definitely go and do whatever you can to find a mentor. And this has been a tradition, again, I think maybe not so much a ritual, but a tradition for a very, very long time. Ever since I think the Industrial Revolution, boys were growing up around their the fathers, so they'll naturally see what the father is doing, and then this is how they'll start learning from them. Or you'd go and be you if you want to learn a trade, you'd go and spend some time with someone just to learn that trade. So I
Yeah.
think it's very deeply engraved in us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's an apprenticeship, right? It's
Yes.
apprenticeship model that, and it's like, even if you go learn how to make shoes or build a house, you're not just learning how to make shoes or build a house. Like you're learning how to be a man of integrity. Like there's all these like symbolic lessons in any craft
Mm.
on some level. And
Mm-hmm.
I sort of have this like nostalgic longing still for that way of life. I mean, that feels like a part of my purpose, and I might not create that in this lifetime, but to recreate that experience for,
Mm.
especially for younger men,
Wow.
where they can grow up having these experiences, being mentored in a way that connects them to a lineage of mastery of self, mastery of something practical as
Mm.
well,
Mm.
and yeah,
Man, you're talking about this, and I'm literally getting goosebumps. I'm just wondering,
yeah,
like, man, if I knew about this 15, even 20 years ago, I'm 31 right now. Like the trajectory of my life, I mean, obviously, it's always most of the time you're thinking about what could have happened, should have, would have happened, but it is priceless. Like it's so valuable for something like this to be able to have a mature, masculine, father figure, if you will, to really guide you through all the unknowns of life.
hmm yeah, yeah, for sure.
Wow. All right. So you've done this for a year or so. After that, what happens?
Yeah,
You're because I'm sure you
it's
had
funny
like.
how we're like going back to the story. Yeah. So yeah, a lot happened after that. I came to a place of feeling a lot more of an empowered version of myself. And um, soon after that, found myself in a new relationship. Um, and um, I was still living in this small town in California, and I fell in love, and it felt like another level of love in a new way. Felt a little bit more authentic, a little deeper. I felt way more able to, ask for what I wanted, to get my needs met to a degree. Um, I actually ended up having my daughter with this person, and um, that was about 15 years ago now, and yeah, so we stayed together for a bit, and I think during that time I'm still working through a lot of stuff, and I really didn't, I'd had this initiation back to myself and who I was, but I hadn't really learned like relationship skills, how to relate to a
Mm.
woman, and um, on top of that, like other life skills, I was still kind of picking those things up. I was pretty young. I was about 26 at the time when
Wow.
my daughter was born. Um, yeah, so there was a bit of a scramble to like get my shit together, and
Mm, mm,
and
mm.
and um, and more ambition than I'd ever felt, because I had this other human that I was living for, and that was really beautiful to me, and it gave
Mm-hmm.
me a sense of direction and purpose, um, becoming a father.
Mm.
um, but that relationship was complicated, and there was still a lot of unconscious stuff that I hadn't seen,
Mm.
and we ended up breaking apart, um, having a really difficult breakup. It was really painful for me. I kind of hit another layer, another kind of pocket of grief around that, and questioning my value in certain ways, and just a lot of fear and anxiety and trauma from
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
experience.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, as it had been in my past with most painful experiences, like the pain had me like seeking answers, seeking like, why is this happening to me? Like, and so I continued to learn and to grow, and I continued doing, actually stayed with that one community of men for a number of years,
Wow.
and in some ways I outgrew some of that methodology. It just wasn't completely serving me after a while, so I sought out other teachers, other programs,
Mm-hmm.
some more to do with like relationships and sexuality,
Mm.
and to kind of uncover things that were not really developed within
Mm-hmm.
me at that
Mm-hmm.
time.
Mm-hmm.
um, and that was really useful. I kind of
Mm.
got in touch with some of the most fundamental things that were necessary in relationship, especially in relating with a woman,
Mm.
and kind of what she was probably seeking that I wasn't able to give,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which was really about me being present and grounded, and able to hold a container
Hold the
for her
space. Yeah,
emotional
yeah, yeah.
experience,
Mm-hmm.
and not get so kind of collapsed into my own stuff,
Mm-hmm.
my own pain body.
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, so
Wow.
that was a long journey, and kept working, kept studying, and eventually 10 or so years later, I started leading some of my own men's groups, just with friends at first, and um, yeah, it started to dawn on me that like, there were a lot of other men that could use this support, and I'd been through a lot, and I could probably offer a lot at that point. So I started coaching and working with men.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Thank you very much for sharing all of that. Yeah, relationships are incredibly complicated. I've been through relationships. I speak to quite a lot of men that are in relationships, and the dynamic there, the awareness that you have with you dealing with your own things versus the other person dealing with their things, and you coming together in a conscious way is incredibly difficult. Like,
Yeah, it's really complex. You're dealing with all of your childhood, all the experiences that have
mm,
been stored in your body, and they're, as soon as we find love, right, our hearts open, and so do all of our wounds kind of reopen. Like
mm,
there's safety in the container of love. So like the subconscious parts of us that have been strapped down for a while, after the kind of honeymoon phase of falling in love, right? They
yes,
start to
yes.
slip out, and then we got work to do.
Yeah, yeah. Well said. Well said. Yeah, getting even to the awareness that of this process that, oh yeah, sure, we're gonna be in a honeymoon period, and one day you wake up and you're like, wow, who is this person? Like, what's happening here? Like, this is not what I signed up for. Yeah, being able to
Mhm.
work through that is, wow, incredibly, yeah, difficult, challenging. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, and we need to be resourced, and I think one of the greatest errors, and this ties back into a lot of what we were sharing earlier, like the culture we live in has created this nuclear family unit, this sort of
Mm.
coupling, and we have the absence of community, an absence of other loves, other qualities of love, other qualities of connection, and so we wrap our whole, sometimes our whole sense of identity up with one other person primarily, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then there's all kinds of projections that happen in that relationship that we can quickly like forget who we are, lose contact with who we are, we take on their stuff, um, go into blaming our stuff on them, and there's not a greater context for us to see ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
and us to
Mm-hmm.
see the other person, and it becomes this really tight viewpoint, and
Mm-hmm.
there's no
Mm-hmm.
perspective, and I think relationships, to me, to like be they're very healthiest, should have support. We should men should have men friends, women should have women friends. Like men might even benefit from having other women friends, you know, and different ages, and you know, and then like guidance too, you know, because it is super complicated, and it's really important to like have a place where we can gather tools on how to work through this stuff, and to be able to reflect on what's happening, and that can happen in a men's group, you know, where you can bring it to other men, and there's wisdom that can come from that. It can happen with a therapist or with a coach, but it's very difficult to just do one-on-one and get your shit sorted out that way.
I love what you said about community. I've seen the Wild Wild Country, this on
Oh, right.
on
Yeah.
Netflix. Yeah, well, that was a little bit maybe taken to the extreme, but
yeah.
I'm wondering, how can you create a community of maybe, I don't know, 100, 150 people where, I mean, not to sound too kind of, you know, happy, clappy, clappy type of scenario that I'm painting or picture.
Kumbaya community.
Yes. But how do you create a community of conscious people who are similar values or aligned with the type of lifestyle that you want to live? Maybe something, you know, shared views on permaculture, for example, what you said. That would be really magical. I met a couple of buddies of mine that we live together in Thailand, and we kind of started talking about this. But right now, everybody is in their own country, and it's very difficult to be able to do something as well as back then. I felt we had that type of community. So that's incredibly valuable.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that's the easy thing to create either, you know. I mean, there's however many, I mean, there's like the 1960s commune type of community, or like, you know, or more of a spiritual community like the Osho, Rajneesh community, right? And you know, often that the kind of guru type of community works for a little while, and you know, it might even be more functional because there's a leader, and and in a way, like, leadership creates structure, and that's easier to do than like this what is the other type of
whether there is no central, it's kind of decentralized. There is no central point of authority.
Right. There's a specific word for it, but I can't remember. But yeah, so that's more complicated, right? Because you have to share leadership. You have to be able to come to agreements. I mean, we every country is like a community, right? But I think we've given so much of our power away to these authorities that it doesn't really feel like not only is the whole person not being acknowledged, it's more like a infrastructural support community versus like a holistic support community. And I think it's more complicated because you get into like the whole human, and you have to take into account like all of their history, you know, just the same thing as if you were in a one-on-one relationship, like all of their trauma and emotional wounding and everything. And the truth is, like, as a whole, there really aren't that many mature, evolved people enough to be able to like handle all the pain that we've collectively gone through. So I mean, I think that's maybe why also that like the guru model of community has worked, because you know, a singular person has done enough inner work that they can hold a lot, right? They have a much larger capacity to not get triggered, and you know, they're somewhat enlightened. I know they have their shadow side too, but
of course everybody does,
but on some level, like they're not just getting sucked into their childhood wounds, which is often what happens when you get into intimate relationship with a single person or a group of people. So it's I mean, I have a vision to create something like that myself, and I don't know if I'm capable of it. I think it would require a group of really mature leaders to hold that. You know, there is one model of community that I think has been pretty successful in Portugal. They're called Tamara, and
Tomorrow. Okay.
they've been around for like 30 years or something like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'll definitely look it up. I'm just like listening to you. I'm just soaking everything in, soaking everything in.
Yeah.
I've never really thought about what you said about the fact that maybe the reason why a community like this, a model of a community, breaks down is because collectively people aren't able to take in all the wounds and the pain that are actually coming up. I was listening to Paul Chick, one of his podcasts, and he was saying how, again, coming from Carl Jung, is people are developmentally arrested. Most of the people walking around are probably with the maturity of a 15-year-old or a 12-year-old or something like that. And
Yeah.
they've developmentally arrested, right? You have a boy living in a man's body. And
Hmm.
this has all kinds of problems. And I can imagine how something like this, if brought in a container of a community per se, could have a very, very negative connotations or impacts. Let's put it this way.
Yeah, yeah. And just coming back to the topic of men's work and how
Mm,
that ties into that, like I think we learn how to mature ourselves in a group of conscious men, or that's one way. It's not, I'm not saying that's the end all solution for everything that we got to deal with, but
mm,
it is a place to work on that.
mm-hmm,
And the what I found is the more immersed I am in that work, and the more I'm willing to bring to the table and be vulnerable and share, the more I'm able to. I mean, there's one thing that happens in that kind of container is you get, if you show up and you're vulnerable and you share your heart and your wounds, you get witnessed in these places that you might normally be too ashamed to be witnessed in, right? And that in itself is healing. Just
mm,
to be witnessed with love and acceptance in the places where you may not have even accepted yourself yet,
mm-hmm,
incredibly healing.
mm-hmm,
And there's a maturation that happens just from that experience, because really the unmet needs that we had that created those wounds are really just like we weren't loved there.
mm-hmm. Wow. The more we dive into this, the more you kind of opening again my mind about, wow, really one of the main focuses should be identifying and working on those wounds, working on those deep things that maybe were inflicted intentionally or unintentionally by parents. I'd imagine that a lot of that probably comes from, of course, society, other parts of the our lives, such as intimate relationships. I'd imagine also from being from our parents. Interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's big. And with that, I want to sort of give a warning label, like, it is possible to sort of get completely sucked into like kind of wound worshiping,
Mm.
where we spend our lives like trying to fix ourselves, like there's something wrong with us.
Mhm,
And so
mhm.
we start to identify with the wound as if that's all that we are, right?
Hmm.
And so, what I found is that spiritual practice, different practices, different traditions, um, allow us to learn how to identify, to not bypass the wound, which, some spiritual traditions will have you bypass the wound. But, to me, a healthy balance is, having awareness of the wounds, being able to feel them, have a relationship to them, but not be run by them, and that
Mhm,
sometimes that takes time. Um, but the practice side of it is we start to also identify with that part of us that is not the wound, that is
mm,
sort of, divine, so to speak. We have this aspect of us that is larger than just our human experience, that spans beyond time and space, and
mm,
that's what happens when we tap into consciousness. And that's what happens when we meditate, right? Meditate, or sometimes in a breath work or yogic practice, we get in touch with that timeless essence of who we are.
mm,
We get in touch with that aspect of our being that is, um, not this body, that is not our history, That is not these thoughts, but that's just awareness itself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Hmm. Wow.
And that's a really valuable and powerful tool to be able
Mm-hmm.
to connect in with that.
And also, and just be able to be mindful of that, right? You are more than your actions, you're more than your thoughts, you're more than your feelings, you're more than your body. Yeah, there's just again pure consciousness, which, yeah, for people that maybe kind of hearing this for the first time, might sound a little bit esoteric, if you will. But
Yeah.
once you again get deep into these practices, meditation, breath work, I found breath work to be incredibly powerful. You've been doing this for a very long time, right?
Yeah. I mean, I've been doing yoga for 20 years or so,
Wow.
not consistently, but
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, that's when I first got into it, and
Mm-hmm.
it changed my life. And what I found, and this is a big part of my practice. It's sort of why, and this isn't a story that I told earlier, but you know, I found out like the name Soma. I don't know if you're familiar with the definition of that. It's the body,
Yeah,
in Greek,
somatic.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's become a huge part of my path. I was given the my birth name from my parents was Amos, which is Soma backwards, and
Wow. Okay.
yeah. So when I was about 20, during that period of time when I was finding myself, um, I somehow just got this intuitive hit to change my name. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
even really know why, and to change it to that. Um,
Wow.
and I didn't even know what it meant at the time, which was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, so I've the reason I'm bringing that up is because the work that I do, it's embodied work. We
Yes.
need to be, to me, to access these higher states of consciousness. My path has been through my body, through
Mm.
my emotions. Everything. Like we were talking earlier, like all of our history, our DNA, all of that's in our body. Our ancestors are
Mm.
living with us, they're living through us, right? And we can try to think our way through it and just kind of live from here up, but that's not really that effective. And
Mm.
and I don't really advocate for the kind of coaching where it's all about mindset and like getting somewhere out there.
Yes.
um, my work is very much about like going into the body and being willing to face our past and our uncomfortable places, and that's where we find our purpose, is when
Mm.
we go into the truth of who we are. And that's also where we connect to that larger than self experience, and that's been my experience personally.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Um, yeah, I've trained. First of all, definitely resonate with what you're saying, and I think also your energy brings a lot of that kind of groundedness, stillness, purpose. That's the kind of the vibe I'm getting from you. Never spoken to you. I've listened to some of the interviews that you've did, but you seem to be very kind of grounded. So everything kind of really ties in, the name and what you're doing right
Yeah.
now, and the energy you're bringing. um, I trained in a few different kind of modalities, coaching and NLP, which is very heavily linguistic and again mindset and changing beliefs, etc. Obviously, your physiology plays a part, but the moment I started, you know, using practices like breath work, like bioenergetics,
Yeah, I love
this
bioenergetics.
yeah, this
Yeah,
whole
it's powerful.
psychosomatic relationship that the mind and the body is one, and how both of them really go together. Wow,
Hmm.
it's a totally different experience. It's again, a lot of the time I think we use our brain to kind of think our way through problems, so to speak.
Yeah.
Whereas really it's using the body to really tap into a different, very primal energy. I think that we kind of forgotten, right? Everything is about thinking and thinking and thinking, whereas we're not really using that part of uh, really the body that much.
Yeah, and I think it's funny that I mean, it makes sense that we live like that, right? Because we're conditioned to like study and read history, and that's, you know, we're like learning through other people's experience. Like that's how we've
Mm.
been taught to learn,
Mm.
rather than pushed out into the world to experience life and learn through our own embodied experience of being, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's how we, wisdom comes from experience, you know, knowledge comes from books, wisdom comes from experience. And to me, that's the most valuable thing we can have.
Booyakasha.
And
Whoa, nice.
yeah. um, I was going to say one other thing around that. So
I think I've
yeah,
interrupted
I
the
guess,
flow a little bit. Sorry.
yeah, no, that's okay. That's okay. I like that, a little explanation. I guess I just wanted to speak to, and I don't completely know the science on this, but I'd like to learn more about it. But, you know, there's this idea of embodied cognition, right? So
Hmm.
I don't know if you ever heard that term, but it's
I don't think so.
you know, and there's also another term called proprioception. So it's, you know, it's our capacity to place our awareness into other parts of our body, you know, like when our attention is on our thoughts, right, it's up here. But we can actually place our attention on our legs, you
Mm.
know, on our belly. You know, in a lot of meditation traditions, you're focusing on that, the other brain, which is the gut brain, you know,
Yes,
down
yes.
here in the Dantian, which the martial arts call the power center of the body, right? So, you know, a lot of ancient traditions recognized all these different things that science is now kind of catching up with. Like we have a brain in our heart too.
Yes,
You know,
yeah.
there's
Most people don't
more
know that.
yeah, more neural pathways running from the gut and the heart to the brain than vice versa. So, and you know, our nervous system also, it's nerves, you know, it's information. So we're gathering information from our environment. So just in our fingertips, right, we can sense through our fingertips, we can sense through our feet.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I think hopefully as we evolve and start to come back to, you know, come away from our addiction to external technologies to kind of satiate us and make us think we're powerful, we'll return back to the body, which is our, you know, our real power and our real capacity. Just like ancient traditions, you know, there's like Maori cultures, right, that could
Yeah.
sail across the oceans and you know, watch like the smallest wave coming in and tell that there was a body of land somewhere way out there and find it, or read the stars, you know, and navigate by the stars.
Mm.
It's like we've lost a lot of these human capacities that were very much of the body, that,
Wow.
you know, we've kind of dumbed ourselves down, I think. And
Mm-hmm.
to me, the next human renaissance is returning to the wisdom of our bodies.
Beautifully put. Like I personally would like to know more about this. One thing that comes to mind is again from this gentleman Michael Gay. He says that sometimes whenever trauma happens, it occurs in parts of the brain where language isn't present. That's why when you go to psychotherapists,
Mm-hmm.
coaches, etc., that in and of itself has value. Really, to really face that, you really have to embody it. Really have to feel it with the body. The whole like psychosomatic relationship. But
Yeah, I think that's so important to acknowledge. Yeah, I don't want to cut you off, but yeah, for
no,
sure.
no, no, great. Like I was just kind of topping your point. All the things you said, I'm fascinated, and it's, you know, with this kind of somatic therapy or body therapy, or you bioenergetics, really the effect is instant because you feel it. It's not you're thinking your way through something and, oh, I'm thinking your way through my problem. You're really feeling it right there and then. That's the, you know, tapping into the wisdom of the body, as you said.
Yeah, yeah, and I want to re-emphasize that point. Like a lot of these wounds, a lot of the places that our bodies got kind of locked into these trauma responses happened in childhood, precognitively, before our brains were fully developed.
Mm.
and you know, we kind of in some ways have to return there in order to rewire in a healthier way.
Mm-hmm.
Because you know, our cognitive mind happened much later. It's another
Yes.
layer,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and in a way, we're going into that primal brain. And when we go into like a fight or flight response, when a traumatic experience that happens, it doesn't have to be a big thing. It doesn't have to be like we get nearly beaten to death. Like there's micro traumas that occur for
Mm-hmm.
most people, just like the withholding of love in one moment when we really needed it is a trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And until we get back in touch with that and untangle that knot, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to be probably living from that
Yeah.
response.
Wow, man. I'm sure we can spend probably the next 3-4
Yeah,
hours without without any kind of rehearsal, just diving into
yeah.
this deeper and deeper. Um, I wanted to ask one last question before we kind of wrap up, because again I am conscious, and also I like to be respectful of your time. Is there what's one thing that you wish I would have asked you that I didn't?
Good question. um, I don't know if I wish anything,
Hmm.
but if there's something I wanted to share, um, I think what feels important to me to share
Please do.
that, yeah, so that I don't think this gets talked about a lot, especially if you're somebody that's just getting into like personal growth and development or coaching. Um, there's a lot of hype out there in this world, and there's a lot of marketing to people that are in pain, um, that some of it some of the marketing might actually lead people to get the help they need, but I think where a lot of men get stuck, and it's very easy to get stuck here when you're in a difficult spot, is feeling like they need to fix themselves, and um, and I think some of the psychological marketing tactics with coaches will prey on that. And I guess I'm just kind of calling that out in a way. And I try
Mm,
not to do that with my own work, because number one, like the path of growth and evolution and healing for me, it's a lifelong journey. And those very coaches that act like they have all the solutions, they don't. They got their own shit they're dealing with at home. I've
mm.
got my own shit that I'm dealing with at home.
Me
And
too.
yeah. And so yeah, I just want to invite, I'm not saying that you shouldn't get support from those people, or those people can't help you in a place where you're challenged. I'm just saying, try to come at it from a place of not trying to fix something, but coming back to your wholeness, coming
Mm,
back to your true identity. It's not about like improvement so much. Like, to me, life is about, one of the definitions of the essential man, which is my brand and my business, is coming back to your true essence, your
mm.
true identity of who you are, beyond all those wounds and all those experiences that you've had, just returning to that place of perfection, wholeness. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for bringing this point up. I speak to some, sometimes men facilitators, and I ask them, what's the future of this kind of field? Men's work, do you see it, the next 5-10 years? Do you think it's going to be more mainstream? Some of them say yes. Some of them are, yeah, I hope so. Some of them are saying, one of the challenges with something going mainstream is that the quality tends to kind of water down a little bit. And like you said, you have people maybe with not the best of intentions that are kind of promising or over promising, certain things that kind of preying a little bit on people which are vulnerable, or in a space where something like this could make them purchase the service of the coaching program, whatever it is, but maybe not necessarily deliver, maybe even leave them worse than they were before that. So I'm very grateful that you're bringing this up, because yeah, it's not so much about fixing, it's about partially it's about embodying and really coming back into yourself.
Absolutely. One last add-on to that.
Sure.
It's returning to ourselves, but also because we're all part of something larger, we're part of a larger culture. In some ways, like our traumas and our wounds and our pains are not our own to deal with alone. And you know, culturally we're a little distorted. We've kind of left the tribe, so to speak, and we've forgotten that, you know, we're actually here for one another. And until collectively we move, in my opinion, this is totally my own philosophy and take on it, till we return to that place where, like, hey bro, I've got your back, sister, like, we're in this together, I love you, then we're all going to be suffering on some level.
Wow. Soma, you're a very wise man, sir. Thank you very much. No, I resonate so much. This similar thoughts I've been having for a while is that, you know, community, how do I create this? And back in the days, whenever someone is sick, the whole community is going to come to be able to help and help that person. Whereas right now it's, yeah, let's not even get into the current state of affairs in the world. That's a whole separate conversation.
It's hard to look at, but yeah, for sure. And you know, we may not see anything like that in this lifetime, but that's part of my mission. Part of why I do men's work is to at least move towards the creation of that kind of culture of support, connection, and kind of loving one another forward.
So am I. And this is such an incredibly powerful thing to be able to have as a purpose, if you will. People who are listening to this and, you know, resonate, which I'm sure that a lot of them will, resonate with your message, your energy, where can they find a little bit more about your work?
Yeah, so you can come check out my website, which is www.theessentialman.net. I'm on Instagram, taking a little bit of an Instagram vacation currently, but I'll probably be back on there more in the new year, and that is the.essential.man on Instagram.
Beautiful. I'll put all the links into the description so people can actually find you. And wow, it's been an absolute pleasure. Incredibly grateful for this conversation. Anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
No, that's great, man. I really loved connecting with you. Appreciate you reaching out, and, you know, look forward to, you know, maybe connecting in person one day and having another conversation if you're up for that.
Indeed. Oh, for sure. I would love to do that. All right, folks, there you have it. Please go check out Soma's website. Definitely, I think a lot of value bombs throughout this interview. And go follow him on Instagram, and I'll see you in the next episode. Peace out.